Riley Tanner knew he was about to die, again. The gory smear of the last unfortunate warrior still streaked the arena floor, and soon, his blood would join it. The crowd of monstrous aliens roared, their guttural chants drowning out his pounding heartbeat. Towering above him, his opponent, a reptilian brute with biceps thicker than tree trunks, flexed his claws and grinned, rows of jagged teeth glistening like knives. Riley wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that the creature's name was Splattertooth, or that Riley himself was becoming something even lower than a joke. He was a spectacle, the battered human idiot who couldn't last 2 minutes in the arena. This wasn't just another fight. This was the universe's favorite punching bag about to become red mist on the floor. "Look at the earthworm! He's practically shaking!" one of the Juggernauts jeered from the stands. The crowd erupted in laughter. Riley clenched his fists. The Juggernauts of Zerther 9, 8-foot-tall slabs of muscle and arrogance, treated him like a walking punchline. They'd seen him stumble, bleed, and fail so many times that his humiliations had become part of their arena entertainment package. Splattertooth roared and charged. Riley barely sidestepped in time, the beast's claws slicing a hair's width from his throat. The crowd jeered louder. Riley's back hit the wall, no escape. Splattertooth's fist came down like a sledgehammer. Riley ducked, purely on reflex, and the creature's fist smashed through the wall instead. Dust filled the air, and for one absurd moment, Riley realized the alien had actually trapped its own arm. He didn't stop to think. Desperation fueled him. He grabbed a jagged metal shard from the broken wall and drove it into Splattertooth's ribs. The beast howled, twisting free and backhanding Riley across the arena like a ragdoll. Riley's vision blurred, his ears ringing as the crowd exploded in hysterics. Another humiliating defeat was moments away. "You still breathing, Brick?" A dry voice crackled in his earpiece. Gorbix's voice, his so-called trainer. A washed-up Zerther 9 warrior turned bitter exile. "Get up! The crowd paid for blood, so bleed on your feet, at least." Riley groaned, dragging himself upright. His ribs felt like broken glass. Splattertooth was already charging again, massive feet thundering across the arena. "Sidestep left," Gorbix barked. "Now!" Riley twisted left as Splattertooth lunged, and the creature's momentum sent him slamming face-first into a stone pillar. The arena shook. The beast staggered, dazed, giving Riley just enough time to grab a fallen chain from the floor. He leapt on the monster's back, wrapped the chain around its throat, and pulled with everything he had. Splattertooth thrashed, bucking like a berserk bull. "Hold on!" Gorbix yelled. Riley gritted his teeth. His arms screamed with pain. Splattertooth twisted violently, and Riley felt the chains slipping. In desperation, he yanked harder, ignoring the burning in his muscles. Splattertooth stumbled, then collapsed in a heap. For one surreal moment, the arena was silent. Then came the laughter, mocking and cruel. The Juggernauts didn't cheer for his win, they jeered because they knew Riley had gotten lucky. "That's your greatest achievement?" a voice bellowed. Gorik the Blood Axe, the undefeated Juggernaut champion, stood watching from the balcony above. "Surviving a fool?" He spat over the railing, and the crowd erupted in laughter again. Hours later, Riley sat in the training barracks, nursing his bruises and shattered pride. Gorbix paced nearby, chewing on a sour-smelling root. "You can't win like this," Gorbix muttered. "Luck won't save you twice." "Gee, thanks for the motivational speech," Riley groaned. "Next time I'll die with better posture." "You're fighting like a human," Gorbix snapped. "Stop thinking about winning. Focus on surviving." "Great advice. I'll just magically grow extra arms and laser vision." "You don't need that," Gorbix said, suddenly serious. "You need to stop playing their game." The truth of it burned. Riley had spent months trying to match their strength, trying to fight like the monsters they were, and losing every time. He wasn't faster, stronger, or tougher than them. But maybe, just maybe, there was another way. Training changed after that. Gorbix forced Riley to abandon brute strength and focus on strategy. Instead of swinging wildly, Riley learned to bait his opponents, letting them overextend or lunge into traps. He mastered dodging instead of blocking, turning aggression into weakness. He spent hours studying arena layouts, memorizing hidden hazards and blind spots. Gorbix drilled earth-fighting tactics into him, grappling holds, leverage techniques, and misdirection. None of it was glamorous, but it worked. Soon, Riley started winning smaller matches. The alien crowds hated it at first. They wanted bloodbaths, not calculated victories. But the longer Riley survived, the more curious they became. The Juggernauts couldn't understand it. This weak human wasn't supposed to outlast them. Then came the rematch with Gorik. The champion sneered as Riley entered the arena. The crowd jeered again. They'd seen this one before. They expected Riley to die fast and ugly. But this time, Riley didn't charge in. He danced around Gorik's attacks, letting the massive Juggernaut tire himself out. Riley used the arena itself, luring Gorik into spiked walls and tripping him into a pit of fire beetles. For the first time in months, the audience began cheering for him. They wanted him to die, yes, but they couldn't look away from the absurd, clever spectacle unfolding before them. Riley still lost that fight. Gorik eventually landed a brutal hammer fist that knocked Riley unconscious. But Riley had lasted almost 10 minutes, a record for any challenger. "You're starting to get it," Gorbix said afterward, dragging Riley's barely conscious body out of the arena. "But if you want to win, you need to fight for something bigger than just surviving." "I don't have anything left," Riley muttered. That night, Riley overheard two Juggernauts talking outside the barracks. They laughed, boasting about the upcoming invasion of Earth, a planet they called a playground for slaughter. The Juggernauts weren't just fighting for sport. They were planning to destroy Riley's home. Riley's blood turned cold. The next day, he returned to training with a fire that startled even Gorbix. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It wasn't about pride or payback. Earth was in danger, and if he couldn't win, no one could. Riley's body ached like a battered drum, every movement dragging a dull throb through his limbs. The arena's cold air still clung to his skin, and every bruise felt like a permanent brand. Yet despite the pain, Riley couldn't stop. Gorbix's words haunted him. If he wanted to win, he needed to fight for something bigger. Earth's fate wasn't some distant concept anymore. It was a ticking clock. He trained like a man with no future, because in this twisted galactic coliseum, that's exactly what he was. Gorbix didn't go easy on him. Every morning started with brutal drills that left Riley gasping on the floor. The old Zertha-9 warrior barked orders without mercy, driving Riley until his limbs shook and his ribs felt ready to crack. The Juggernauts believed in overwhelming power. Riley had seen their warriors boast, pound their chests, and crush their enemies in contests of raw strength. But that wasn't Riley's path. Gorbix hammered tactics into him that no alien warrior had ever seen before. Riley practiced misdirection, letting his enemies believe he was weaker, slower, or cornered before striking at their weakest points. He learned how to control the flow of a fight, using footwork to bait overcommit attacks. Gorbix taught him the subtle art of psychological warfare, smirks, fake stumbles, and sarcastic taunts that could drive even disciplined warriors into blind rage. The arena wasn't just a battleground, it was a stage, and Riley was learning to become its master. In one match, Riley faced a towering insected brute known as Krivig the Splitter. The beast's jagged limbs bristled with blade-like appendages, and it moved with terrifying speed. The crowd roared, hungry for another human bloodbath. Riley sidestepped Krivig's opening slash and stumbled on purpose, letting the crowd laugh as Krivig charged again. But as the creature lunged, Riley spun behind him and struck low, driving a spiked rod into the beast's exposed knee joint. Krivig fell screaming, unable to stand. Riley didn't finish him off. He didn't have to. The arena guards dragged Krivig away, and for the first time, the crowd didn't just jeer, they started to murmur. The Earthman was supposed to be a joke. Now, they weren't sure what to think. Word spread. Riley's reputation shifted from pathetic to lucky, and then to something far more dangerous, unpredictable. The crowd didn't know what to expect when Riley stepped into the arena, and unpredictability was power. Riley played into it, adding flair to his victories, dodging strikes with exaggerated spins, slipping insults between his attacks, and baiting his enemies into humiliating mistakes. One Juggernaut swung so hard he dislocated his own shoulder when Riley ducked. Another tried to crush Riley with a massive spiked club, only to hit a metal post so hard the weapon snapped in two. The crowd, once hostile, now laughed with Riley instead of at him. His matches became spectacle, part comedy, part strategy, part survival. But Riley knew he was only buying time. Each victory chipped away at the patience of the Juggernaut warlords. The arena leaders couldn't stand to see a human rising above their so-called superior species. They started tampering with his matches, rigging the environment against him. Hidden spikes lined the arena floor. Gas vents hissed toxic fumes mid-fight. Opponents entered armed with weapons far deadlier than what the rules allowed. Riley survived them all barely, but he knew the warlords were setting the stage for something worse. Then came the announcement, a blood feud, the ultimate arena challenge. No rules. No escape. Victory only came when one fighter lay dead. And his opponent was Gorik the Blood Axe, the reigning champion. The warlords wanted Riley erased. The blood feud would be their spectacle, the ultimate humiliation of Earth's Gladiator clown. Word spread fast, and soon the arena's betting boards filled with outrageous odds. Riley wasn't just expected to lose. The gamblers were placing bets on how many bones Gorik would break before he killed him. Gorbix warned Riley to run, to find a way to escape the arena before the fight took place. But Riley refused. Earth's survival depended on him proving that humans weren't weak, that they could stand against the galaxy's greatest warriors. Running wouldn't just mean defeat, it would mean letting Earth's fate be decided by monsters who believed humanity deserved to burn. The days before the blood feud were tense. Gorbix spent hours drilling Riley in one final plan, not to win, but to survive. The arena's layout was predictable, filled with familiar structures Riley had memorized. Gorbix coached him on turning the arena itself into a weapon. Riley practiced luring enemies into kill zones, blind corners where metal spikes waited, gas vents that could be triggered as smoke screens, and loose tiles that could be used to create uneven footing. Gorbix's grim expression never faded during training, and when Riley asked if he thought this plan would actually work, the old warrior only shrugged. "It's better than nothing," Gorbix muttered. "And you've survived better than nothing before." The day of the blood feud arrived. The arena roared with the deafening cheers of thousands of alien spectators. Riley stood in the pit, the hot wind of the Colosseum whipping dust across his face. Above him, Gorik the Blood Axe loomed on the opposite side, muscles rippling beneath his obsidian armor. The champion's axe gleamed under the arena lights, a jagged weapon that had ended more lives than Riley could count. The crowd chanted Gorik's name, pounding their fists in unison like war drums. The announcer's voice echoed through the arena, drawing out the moment for maximum tension. When the signal horn finally blasted, Gorik charged without hesitation. His massive axe swung in a blur of steel, and Riley barely avoided the blow. The axe crashed into the stone wall behind him, shattering it in a spray of debris. Riley stumbled backward, forcing himself to remember the plan. He needed to keep Gorik moving, burning energy, making mistakes. Gorik charged again, and Riley led him toward one of the arena's spiked pillars. At the last second, Riley dived aside. Gorik swerved at the final moment, narrowly avoiding impalement, but Riley had expected that. He reached out and slammed a loose tile under Gorik's foot. The champion stumbled, briefly off balance, and Riley struck with a steel rod he'd hidden earlier. The blow landed hard against Gorik's knee, sending the giant staggering. The crowd gasped, but Gorik only smiled. Riley's heart sank as he saw the jagged metal protrusions hidden beneath Gorik's armor. The champion hadn't even felt the strike. Before Riley could react, Gorik seized him by the throat and hurled him halfway across the arena. Pain exploded through Riley's ribs as he slammed into the stone floor. Dazed, Riley struggled to rise. Gorik advanced, axe in hand, grinning like a beast savoring a kill. Riley knew this wasn't a fight anymore, this was a hunt, and he was the prey. The crowd screamed for blood, and Riley understood one terrible truth: if he didn't do something fast, Earth was as good as gone. Riley's vision blurred as he stumbled to his feet. His ribs felt like they were on fire, and every breath cut through his chest like broken glass. Gorik was closing in, his bloodied axe dragging across the arena floor with a metallic screech. The crowd roared louder, their bloodthirsty chants drowning out everything else. Riley wiped sweat from his brow, blinking hard to stay focused. He had planned for traps, misdirection, and fatigue, but nothing had accounted for the sheer brutality Gorik brought to the arena. The Juggernaut champion wasn't just stronger, he was faster than expected, moving with terrifying precision for a creature that size. Riley was battered, half-broken, and out of ideas. "You've got nothing left, Earthworm," Gorik sneered, his voice a guttural growl. "I'll make this quick, unless you'd prefer to crawl a little longer." Riley staggered back, buying a few seconds. The arena was rigged, he knew that much. The warlords didn't want this fight to be fair. They wanted him humiliated, butchered like a cornered animal. His eyes flicked toward one of the vents lining the floor. Gorbix had warned him about those. They weren't just for ventilation, they could release plumes of gas on command. Riley staggered closer, dragging his foot over a loose stone. The tile shifted slightly, and he felt the hidden trigger plate beneath it. Gorik saw the movement and lunged. Riley threw himself sideways, barely dodging the sweeping axe. The blade struck the stone floor with a deafening crack, sparks flying in all directions. Riley slammed his foot on the trigger plate as he rolled away. For a second, nothing happened. Then the ground hissed, and a dense cloud of gas erupted from the vent. Gorik snarled and stumbled back, swinging blindly in the fog. Riley scrambled to his feet and backed away through the smoke. His lungs burned as the stinging cloud filled the air. He knew it wouldn't hold Gorik for long, but it was enough to buy him a few precious moments. Gorik's heavy footsteps thudded in the distance, muffled by the gas. Riley's mind raced. There had to be something else he could use. His eyes scanned the arena until they locked onto a cluster of jagged spikes near the far wall, remnants of an old, damaged pillar. The metal shards jutted outward like crooked fangs. That was his chance. Gorik's shadow emerged from the smoke, axe gleaming as he grinned through the haze. Blood trickled from a shallow gash on his forehead, the first mark Riley had managed to leave. Gorik grinned wider. "Is that all you've got?" Gorik growled. "I expected better from the galaxy's biggest joke." Riley didn't answer. Instead, he staggered toward the spike cluster, forcing his limp to look worse than it was. Gorik followed, eyes narrowing. Riley stumbled again, exaggerating the motion. The crowd howled with laughter, believing they were about to witness a pathetic ending. Gorik laughed too, closing the gap with confidence. "You're finished," Gorik spat. Riley faked a final stumble, then twisted sharply as Gorik swung his axe. The blade missed by inches, biting deep into the floor. Riley dove behind the spikes and spun around. Gorik, unable to stop his momentum, stumbled forward. The Juggernaut's armored shoulder smashed into the spikes, driving them deep into his side. Gorik howled in pain, lashing out blindly. Riley dodged the wild strike and grabbed a fallen metal chain from the arena floor. He sprang onto Gorik's back, wrapping the chain around the Juggernaut's throat. Gorik thrashed violently, dragging Riley across the floor. His massive hands clawed at the chain, but Riley locked it tighter, twisting the links with everything he had. Blood streamed down Gorik's side, staining the spikes beneath him. Riley could feel his own strength fading. His arms felt like lead, his ribs screamed with every breath. But he held on, driven by the memory of what Gorik had said before the fight. He remembered those words clearly now. The Juggernauts weren't just fighting for pride, they were planning to burn Earth to the ground. Gorik's thrashing slowed, his movements turning sluggish. His powerful arms clawed weakly at the chain before dropping limply to his sides. Riley kept the chokehold locked for a few moments longer, just to be sure. When Gorik's body finally went still, Riley staggered away, gasping for breath. The arena fell silent. The crowd stared in stunned disbelief. The mighty Goric the Blood Axe, champion of Zerther 9, lay motionless on the cold stone floor. For a brief moment, Riley allowed himself to feel relief, but it didn't last long. A deafening blast shook the arena walls. The gates at the far end slammed open, and a squad of armored juggernauts stormed inside. The warlords had no intention of letting Riley walk away victorious. "Run!" Gorbix's voice crackled urgently in Riley's earpiece. "The blood feud was never meant to be fair. They're sending in the kill squads." Riley's legs barely worked, but he forced himself to move. He stumbled toward the opposite gate, dodging the blasts of plasma rifles as the warlord soldiers closed in. Gorbix's voice shouted directions in his ear, urging him down narrow corridors, past rusting walls, and through smoke-filled tunnels. Riley knew the arena's back rooms well. He'd spent enough miserable hours there, but the Juggernauts were gaining. "Left!" Gorbix barked. "Down the chute!" Riley turned sharply and flung himself into the metal chute without hesitation. He slid down the narrow passage, tumbling out into a scrap-filled pit below. The walls were lined with shattered armor, broken weapons, and the rotting remains of forgotten warriors. Before he could stand, Gorbix appeared at the far end, waving frantically. "Come on!" Gorbix yelled. "We've got seconds!" Riley stumbled after him, both men sprinting down a winding tunnel as explosions rumbled overhead. The arena was collapsing, the warlord's last attempt to crush Riley before news of his victory could spread. Gorbix led him through the maze of tunnels until they emerged in the outskirts of the slave quarters, where battered ships and rusting vehicles were strewn across the dry wasteland. The arena's towering silhouette crumbled in the distance, smoke rising like a funeral pyre. "We're not safe yet," Gorbix warned. "The warlords won't stop until you're dead." Riley's breath was ragged, his mind spinning. He had won, somehow, but victory didn't feel like triumph. Earth was still a target, and the warlords weren't finished. Whatever came next, he knew this wasn't over. "You think they'll come after Earth?" Riley asked quietly. Gorbix's face hardened. "I know they will." Riley stared at the smoke rising from the ruined arena. His battered body ached, and his ribs throbbed with every breath. But the fear that had weighed him down for months was gone. The Juggernauts had called him weak, mocked him as a fool, but they weren't laughing now. He had beaten their champion, and now they knew what one determined human could do. Riley Tanner wasn't a joke anymore. He was a survivor, and he was ready for whatever came next. Riley Tanner stood on the bridge of Gorbix's rusting transport ship, watching the stars blur into streaks as they sped away from Zerther 9's orbit. His muscles still ached from the blood feud, and the bruises along his ribs pulsed with every breath. Despite the pain, a strange calm had settled over him. He was alive. He had defeated Goric the Blood Axe, survived the warlord's treachery, and escaped the arena with his head still attached. But even now, he knew that survival wasn't victory, not yet. "They'll come," Gorbix muttered beside him, his fingers dancing over the ship's console. "The warlords won't just let this go. Goric was more than a champion, he was a symbol. The fact that you beat him..." Gorbix's voice trailed off as he shook his head. "They'll want to erase you, and everything you represent." Riley stared out at the distant stars. He had spent months being mocked, humiliated, and beaten within an inch of his life. The Juggernauts had treated him like dirt, a pathetic human they believed didn't belong in their galaxy. He had proven them wrong. But that wasn't enough. They weren't just angry about his victory. They were furious that he had survived long enough to become a threat. The warlords had seen him defy their strongest warrior and make a fool of their so-called superior race. Now they wouldn't stop until Earth was ashes. "How long do we have?" Riley asked quietly. "Not long," Gorbix replied. "They won't send a fleet, not yet. They'll strike fast and brutal, try to make an example out of Earth before the news of your victory spreads too far." Riley clenched his fists, frustration bubbling beneath his exhaustion. He had spent months fighting to survive in that brutal arena, and now he was facing something far worse. Winning had made him a target, not just for himself, but for the planet he had barely been able to protect. "We can't just sit here," Riley said. "We have to warn Earth." "Already working on it," Gorbix muttered. He jabbed a few keys, and a battered holoscreen flickered to life. "I've sent out a coded message to the Earth colonies, but we need to get there first. They won't believe some alien warning, they need to see you." Riley exhaled heavily. He had spent most of his life feeling like a failure, a washed-up fighter who couldn't even keep his own career together. Now he was Earth's best hope, and the responsibility weighed on him like a stone. Days later, they reached Earth's outer orbit. The planet gleamed blue and green against the void, a fragile sphere of life in the cold expanse of space. But Riley couldn't shake the knot in his stomach. The warlords weren't the type to hesitate. They would come hard and fast, and when they did, Earth wouldn't be ready. Gorbix landed the ship in a secluded desert outpost just outside the main human colony. The settlement was small, a cluster of weathered structures standing against the dry wind. As they disembarked, a crowd of colonists gathered around, staring wide-eyed at the scarred human warrior and his alien companion. "You sure they'll listen?" Riley asked quietly. "They'll listen," Gorbix muttered. "Once they know what's coming." Riley stepped forward and told them everything, about Zertha 9, the blood feud, and the warlord's plan to strike Earth as revenge. Some laughed, others stared in disbelief. But when he showed them the broadcast footage Gorbix had smuggled from the arena, the moment Gorik the Blood Axe fell, their expressions turned cold and fearful. The colony leader, a grizzled veteran named Corvin, gathered his people that evening. "We've seen war before," Corvin growled. "We're not just rolling over for a bunch of oversized thugs. They want a fight? We'll give them one." Riley stood with Gorbix as the colony scrambled to prepare. The settlers weren't soldiers. They were miners, engineers, and scavengers, but they worked with fierce determination. They fortified the outpost, rigging crude energy cannons along the perimeter and salvaging whatever weapons they could from abandoned supply depots. Riley helped where he could, teaching hand-to-hand tactics that Gorbix had taught him. He knew brute force wouldn't save them, they had to outsmart their attackers. Days later, the Juggernauts arrived. Their strike ship descended through the clouds like a burning comet, engines roaring as it touched down just outside the colony. The air turned heavy with dread as armored figures marched into view, towering warlords in gleaming armor, their faces twisted with smug arrogance. Their leader, a hulking brute named Thalgar the Savage, grinned viciously as he called out to the gathered colonists. "We came for the human," Thalgar sneered. "Hand him over, and we'll leave the rest of you in peace." "No chance," Riley called back, stepping forward. "You want me? Come and get me!" The warlords charged. The colony erupted into chaos as energy bolts and plasma rounds tore through the air. The settlers fought fiercely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Juggernauts smashed through barricades, tossing defenders aside like rag dolls. Riley found himself face to face with Thalgar, dodging the massive warlord's hammer-like fists. Every strike felt like an earthquake, but Riley kept moving, luring Thalgar toward a cluster of unstable fuel canisters. Thalgar roared and swung his massive fist. Riley sidestepped at the last moment, grabbed a discarded plasma pistol, and fired at the canisters. The explosion engulfed Thalgar in a storm of fire and smoke. The warlord stumbled from the flames, armor blackened and twisted. Before Thalgar could recover, Riley lunged and drove a steel rod into the Juggernaut's chest. Thalgar gasped once, then collapsed. The remaining Juggernauts faltered. Their leader's death broke their confidence, and the colonists seized the moment. Gorbix led the charge, rallying the defenders to drive the surviving warlords back toward their ship. The battered invaders retreated, their ship's engines igniting as they fled into the sky. The colony was left battered and wounded, but alive. The survivors cheered, but Riley knew this wasn't the end. The Juggernauts wouldn't stop with one defeat. They would regroup, and next time they would strike harder. "You know they'll be back," Gorbix said quietly as they watched the sky. "I know," Riley replied. "But next time, we'll be ready." In the weeks that followed, Riley remained with the colonists, helping them rebuild stronger than before. News of the Juggernauts' defeat spread across the galaxy, and whispers of the Earthman champion reached distant worlds. The title felt strange to Riley. He hadn't asked to be anyone's hero. But he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let Earth become another footnote in the galaxy's history. One evening, as Riley stood alone on the colony's watchtower, Gorbix joined him, a grin tugging at his scarred face. "You know," Gorbix muttered, "for a species the galaxy kept calling weak, you humans aren't half bad." Riley laughed softly, the tension finally lifting from his chest. The Juggernauts had mocked him, underestimated him, and tried to destroy him. But they had made one mistake: they forgot that humans don't break easily. Riley had fought, bled, and survived. And no matter what came next, he knew one truth: they weren't laughing anymore. Riley Tanner woke to the sound of distant alarms blaring across the colony. The low, wailing tone was unmistakable, an early warning system rigged by the engineers to detect incoming ships. He barely had time to pull on his boots before Gorbix burst through the door, his expression grim. "They're back," Gorbix growled. "Juggernaut scouts. 3 ships this time." Riley felt his stomach turn. He had known this day was coming, but he had hoped for more time. The colony had grown stronger since the last attack, with reinforced barricades, upgraded weapons, and better defenses. But against a full strike force of Zerthernine warlords, those preparations still felt fragile. "Where are they now?" Riley asked as he grabbed his battered leather jacket and slung a plasma rifle over his shoulder. "Landing a few clicks north," Gorbix said. "Looks like they're waiting, probably scouting the area first." Riley followed Gorbix through the winding corridors of the outpost. The colonists were already mobilizing, grabbing weapons, stacking supplies, and reinforcing barricades. The tension in the air was thick, but no one panicked. These people had faced death before, and they knew what was coming. Corvin met them near the colony gate, his face hard as stone. "They're not here for a fight," Corvin muttered. "Not yet. They're waiting for reinforcements." Riley cursed under his breath. If the Juggernauts were stalling, that meant they weren't just aiming to kill him, they were planning to wipe out the entire settlement. Every man, woman, and child here would be nothing more than collateral damage in their twisted need for revenge. "We can't just wait for them to grow stronger," Riley said. "We need to hit them first." Corvin shook his head. "You're talking suicide." "Not if we play it smart," Gorbix interrupted. "They're scouts. They won't be expecting us to strike first. We hit hard and fast before their reinforcements arrive." An hour later, Riley found himself crawling through dry brush along the northern ridge. The colony's most experienced fighters, about 30 men and women, each armed with scavenged rifles, explosives, or modified weapons, crept silently beside him. The Juggernaut scouts had landed in a rocky clearing, their sleek black ships standing like metal giants. The warlords themselves were spread out, some setting up defensive positions while others lazily patrolled the area. Riley scanned their numbers. He counted about 15 heavily armored Juggernauts, all of them geared for war. Their brutal weapons gleamed in the sunlight: thick-bladed axes, serrated swords, and rifles twice the size of anything Riley had ever seen. This wasn't just a scouting party, they had come prepared to slaughter. Gorbix tapped Riley's arm. "We can't take them head-on," he muttered. "But if we hit their supply crates first, we can cripple them." Riley nodded. He signaled to the group, and they split into teams. One group moved around to the left flank while Riley led his squad toward the supply crates. The warlords were careless, too confident in their size and strength to expect an ambush. Riley's team reached the edge of the camp, crouching low behind a ridge of boulders. A Juggernaut warrior stood just feet away, his back turned as he leaned lazily against the crate. Riley motioned to one of the colonists, a wiry teenager named Jax, who carefully unhooked a grenade from his belt. Riley nodded. Jax activated the charge and tossed it over the ridge. The explosion shattered the air. The Juggernaut never had a chance. The blast tore through the crates, sending jagged shrapnel slicing into nearby warriors. The camp erupted into chaos, and before the warlords could organize, the colonists attacked. Plasma fire filled the clearing as Riley's group swept in, firing from behind cover. The Juggernauts fought back viciously, their booming war cries echoing across the valley. Riley ducked behind a burnout console, firing bursts of energy rounds toward a Juggernaut wielding a spiked hammer. The brute charged forward, shrugging off the blasts like insect bites. Riley waited until the last moment, then grabbed a nearby length of metal pipe and swung hard, smashing the Juggernaut's knee. The warlord staggered, roaring in pain. Riley drove the pipe into the Juggernaut's throat, and the massive warrior collapsed. The fight raged on, brutal and chaotic. Explosions tore through the camp as the colonists pushed forward. Several Juggernauts were dead, and others were retreating toward their ships. Riley saw one of them sprinting toward a control panel on the nearest vessel, likely signaling for reinforcements. "Stop him!" Riley shouted. Jax bolted ahead, raising his plasma pistol. The Juggernaut turned, raising his rifle, too fast, too sudden. Riley saw the flash of gunfire, and Jax crumpled to the ground. A rage boiled up inside Riley, a surge of fire hotter than any pain he'd endured in the arena. He sprinted after the retreating Juggernaut, tackling him from behind before he reached the control panel. The two of them slammed hard against the metal hull. The Juggernaut snarled, driving an elbow into Riley's side. Riley gasped, pain exploding in his ribs, but he refused to let go. The Juggernaut grabbed Riley's throat, lifting him off the ground. Spots danced in Riley's vision, but with the last of his strength, he drew his knife from his belt and drove it into the warlord's wrist. The grip loosened, and Riley dropped to his feet. He grabbed the Juggernaut's own rifle from his belt and fired point blank. The blast punched a smoking hole through the warrior's chest. Riley staggered back, gasping for air as the Juggernaut slumped to the ground. The remaining warlords, seeing their numbers dwindling, turned and fled toward their remaining ship. Gorbix's voice called out from the ridge, and a rocket streaked through the air. The missile struck the fleeing ship's engines, and the vessel erupted in flames. The battle was over. The colonists stood in the wreckage, bruised and bloody, but victorious. The surviving Juggernauts had fled, their leader dead, and their reinforcements cut off. Corvin stood beside Riley, his face grim. "They'll keep coming," Corvin said. "This isn't over." "I know," Riley muttered. "But they know what's waiting for them now." Later that night, as the fires burned low and the colony mourned its dead, Riley sat alone on the outskirts of the settlement. Gorbix found him there, carrying a dented flask of Zerther 9 liquor. "You did good," Gorbix said, handing Riley the flask. "Not good enough," Riley replied. "Jax is gone. Others too. You think this was your fault?" Gorbix scoffed. "Those people followed you because they believed in you. That's not weakness, that's leadership. And you're not done yet." Riley took a long drink from the flask, feeling the burning liquid scorch his throat. He stared at the stars above, knowing that somewhere out there, the warlords were already planning their next move. They wouldn't stop until Earth was ashes, but Riley wasn't going to let that happen. He had survived the blood feud, outsmarted Gorik, and turned a ragged band of colonists into warriors. The Juggernauts had tried to break him. They had mocked him, hunted him, and tried to erase him. But Riley Tanner had fought back. He wasn't a joke anymore. He was a survivor, a fighter, and he was ready for whatever war was coming next.